So this morning I want to talk about prioritizing peace. And in the Buddhist teachings, the pursuit of inner peace is really a primary goal. It's really an essential goal because it means diligently, and the way we get there, I mean, in simplest terms, it's more complicated, obviously, but the way we get there is to really diligently and consistently override the ego's wish to prove itself superior to everyone around us. Okay, then this notion really resonates. This notion of managing the ego skillfully really resonates with the practical aspects of the Dharma because it points to one of the core challenges on our path, which is the ego. The ego in the Buddhist sense, and remember the Buddha never used that term. He used the term no self, but to characterize the absence of a dominant ego. But it really represents this concept of a false self. This mask we wear, this clinging to the idea that we talked about recently of I, me, and mine. It's all about me, and how much suffering that can generate. And so to cultivate inner peace, we learn to recognize and transcend, or at least dial back on this ego-driven need for validation, constant sense of superiority. And it's only by doing so, if we, that we can really begin to find some freedom from the cycles of craving, aversion, and dissatisfaction. Because so many of the things that arise from craving, aversion, and dissatisfaction are ego-related. At the heart of the ego's demands, if you will, or demand, is a constant need to assert its importance. It whispers always in our ear, I am better, I am smarter, I am richer, I am younger, I am more deserving, whatever, on and on. And when we talked about, if you want, a few weeks ago, if you want more happiness, have there be less me, that's really what we were talking about. This desire to prove ourselves superior it's exhausting on the one hand, and it's also a source of both internal and external conflict. Okay, and it's rooted, as so many things are, in the three poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed, aversion, and ignorance. Okay, and the ego really feeds on these three poisons. Okay, creating the illusion that by proving itself superior to others, somehow we're going to find fulfillment and happiness. I mean, that's the kind of bill of goods that we get sold. But the Buddha saw through that, and he saw that, the pursuit of the ego's needs, he used the metaphor, are like drinking salty water to quench thirst. It only deepens our suffering at the end of the day. The more we seek superiority, the more we strengthen our attachment to this notion of self. It just perpetuates feelings of insecurity, self-doubt, envy, fear, because it's always underlying that ego's assertion of specialness. And this whole struggle really disturbs our inner peace. It really leads us further away from the kind of freedom that the Buddha promised us. Overriding the ego's desire to prove itself superior, it really requires diligence on our part. It really requires consistency on our part. And most especially, it requires mindful awareness on our part as a tool for observing our thoughts and emotions as they arise, because much of what's going to arise is going to be ego-driven. When we cultivate this self-awareness, we notice more skillfully, we notice when the ego arises. When we feel the urge to compare ourselves to others, to win an argument, to have the last word, to seek praise, to seek validation, that's the ego. That's the signal that's what's pushing against us. But we can make a choice not to act on those impulses, because our mindfulness gives us the tools to pause, first to notice. That's what I was just talking about. First to notice, then to pause, then to reflect, and choose a response more aligned with inner peace, which often means coming from a place of greater humility. So let's take, for example, that someone criticizes our work. our sort of default reactivity there is defensiveness. We want to prove the person wrong who criticized us. We want to assert our competence. We want to show them that they misjudged us. But what if we step back from that and just say, what am I defending here? What is this really worth disturbing my inner peace? Is this really worth, a battle with this person? Because what the practice allows us to do is see that our worth is not diminished by the criticism of others. It is only diminished by the criticism of others when we give weight to it, when we give credence to it, when we believe what they're saying. It's all, but the antidote is not to prove the other person wrong. I mean, they're still maybe holding on to this view of us. True inner peace arises when we let go of the need to win or be right or to have the last word. And think about how often we do that. We do it a lot. So then another antidote to the ego's desire for superiority, as I alluded to a moment ago, is the cultivation of both compassion for ourselves and others and our good old friend humility. Humility reminds us we're not that special. Yes, we're solidly good people, but so's many other people. We're all interconnected. We're all interdependent. No one is inherently superior or inferior, regardless of our judging minds. That's where humility can be such a powerful practice. Because we are simply different expressions, each of us, of the same reality. As the Buddha taught, clinging to the idea of a fixed self is a delusion. When we let go of this idea that there's a permanent me that is somehow this, that, and the other, superior, whatever, we open ourselves up to a more inclusive perspective. The compassion further softens the ego because it shifts us out of this focus, this self-centered focus on our own concerns, to the well-being of those around us. When we see others, regardless of their station in life, as fellow travelers in this world, struggling with their own challenges and insecurities, it becomes easier to let go of the need to be superior or to win. And yes, other people might appear more down and out or struggling, but we have to recognize their core humanity. Okay, that is the challenge here. Not to feel superior. We offer them kindness, we offer them compassion, we offer them understanding. Because what that does is it also nourishes our own inner peace. When we see that, when we see someone that's down and out, we appreciate that they're a fellow traveler with a lot worse luck than perhaps we're dealing with. I had a brief encounter like that yesterday, and it was kind of a wake-up call, to see the depth of this person's struggles and thinking, they're human too. They deserve the same things we all seek. And then we invoke equanimity as a cornerstone of this inner peace that I alluded to earlier. It's the ability to remain balanced and undisturbed by praise, by blame, by success, by failure, the worldly winds that we talk about. We don't get knocked over by criticism. We don't get too filled up with praise. When the ego seeks superiority, which is its tendency, it will swing between elation when someone's telling us how wonderful we are, or we're telling ourselves that, and despair when we feel criticized or when we judge ourselves to fall short. It's just a roller coaster. When elation is when we perceive ourselves as better than others, despair when we feel inferior. All that has to do with comparing mind with judging. Equanimity gives us some ways to transcend those fluctuations, that roller coaster ride, because we recognize that our true worth, our core, is not dependent on external validation. Now, as well as I do, that is so contrary to what our culture teaches, that, that bumper sticker, whoever dies with the most toys wins, or I forget the exact wording, but, the fact that we try to put all this external baggage on ourselves to win the human competition game. But our true worth is not about that. It's about finding some inner peace. Now, remembering that equanimity doesn't mean indifference. It doesn't mean we don't care. It's just an inner sense of calm acceptance. It allows us to engage with the world without getting so entangled with the ego's demands and dramas. Okay. We step back from that. We maintain our inner peace even in the face of challenges, criticisms, compliments, temptations to prove ourselves. Prioritizing inner peace is not a one-shot deal. It is a continuous practice. We catch it when we start to feel ourselves on that roller coaster. We remain vigilant about it. We have patience about how difficult it is. And we continue our commitment to self-awareness, because without that, we just aren't going to see it. So let's just go through a few practical steps for overriding the ego's demands. The first one, of course, is that self-awareness, practicing mindful awareness. So we begin each day with mindful meditation, whether 5 minutes or 1 minute, or just standing still and reminding ourselves to set an intention. To be aware of the ego's tendencies throughout the day. It will show up all over the place. So that's the first one. Then the noticing, pausing, and reflecting that I mentioned a few minutes ago. When we feel the urge to prove ourselves superior, to sort of win this current discussion or whatever, we take a deep breath and ask, will this action bring me peace, or will it increase my suffering? That's always the question. And then we cultivate gratitude, okay? We focus on what we have. We talk about this frequently, rather than what we feel is lacking. Because gratitude is a wonderful way to dissolve the ego's needs for comparison, for winning, for acquiring more, trappings of winning, and so forth. It helps foster contentment. And then out of that comes generosity and kindness. You know, one of the beauties of generosity is that it shifts the focus from me, I, me, mine, and it nurtures a sense of connection and purpose. We embrace impermanence. You know, we remind ourselves that all things, and especially in this context, praise and criticism, are transient. One day I'm up, one day I'm down if I start riding that roller coaster. And as I said, it is exhausting. And holding on to that stuff, trying to hold on, you know, if someone compliments me and I just try to hold on to it, it's going to dissipate. And then I'm going to suffer, okay? It's not going to stick around. And the next thing I know, you know, I'm being criticized, and then dealing with that. And then the wisdom that underlies all this, to reflect on the teachings, to reflect on the points that I've been making about the ego, you know, the clarity and the guidance that comes from cultivating wisdom. You know, wisdom is being able to step back and see this pattern, see these patterns, see the ego's desires for superiority, you know, and once we begin to see it and recognize it, it becomes, the door opens for it to be transformative, because we're confronting the illusions of this fixed self. We're cultivating mindfulness, cultivating humility, cultivating compassion and equanimity. We let go of the constant need to prove ourselves. We free ourselves, or we at least reduce the need or the tendency to get involved in these chains of comparison and competition that are so rampant in our culture. And we open the door when we do that to greater happiness, greater peace. You know, the Buddha is quoted as having said in the Dhammapada, peace comes within, do not seek it without. Everything about seeking it without is probably ego-driven, if you think about all the ways we outwardly seek some kind of peace or happiness or contentment. And yes, this journey is challenging, but if we commit to it with diligence, with consistency, we can learn to manage the ego skillfully. It's not going to go away. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's the management of it that becomes a priority so that it doesn't run the show. And in doing that, we embrace a life of greater inner contentment. So we have to manage the ego. So that's some thoughts today on prioritizing peace in our lives.